always say, you always have to be more stubborn than your stubborn belly fat. So you have to kind of resist it and go longer than most people to get it off.
So, I've struggled with it my whole life. I'm so glad I podcast because you can only see the top up, right?
Same thing, I'm here like that.
That's why it's my favorite thing to do. A lot of it is psychological, right? The
100%.
entire, it's like this bad relationship with food kind of that we need to retrain.
Most South Asians don't deal well with hunger. Hunger's bad in most cases. And now you're going to tell me that now you have to do food without for 12 hours? Most of the people that I work with don't have a food issue, they have a life issue.
Welcome to Uncover Your Eyes, where we break down the most pressing health topics shaping lives today. Have you struggled with losing belly fat or inches off your midsection? I know I have my entire life, especially being South Asian. So today we are going to break down that science behind why it's so difficult to lose the fat around the midsection without just resorting to gimmicks and fad diets. Today we have Nathan Johnson. He's London's best personal trainer who specializes in South Asian fat loss and sustainable lifestyles in the South Asian community. So welcome, Nathan. So, tell me how you got into, I want to know everything like from the coaching to, talking more about belly fat and focusing on that midsection.
Yeah, so taking you back, I was a really fat kid. So all my family are significantly overweight. And I had a knee injury that led to me having a knee replacement only 2 years ago. So I had lots of pain, not much movement, played a lot of PlayStation, and gained a lot of weight. There's a biscuit cupboard in our house, which I frequently visited on a day-to-day basis. And then when I was like 15, I didn't want to stay anymore in XL t-shirts. I'm 5'5" as well, so I look like a white 50 Cent with like really long white t-shirts. I decided to embark on like a first fitness journey and try and lose weight in my family home, which obviously most people it's very, very challenging for any type of cuisine or kind of nation. But I decided I wanted to be a physiotherapist and wasn't clever enough. I didn't put the hard work in, so I ended up going to university to do something different. Anyway, I did a sports injuries degree, so a lot of my stuff in the first couple of years of degree was sports injuries, physiotherapy, rugby teams. But to be able to maintain the lifestyle in London, because it's quite expensive, I had to become a personal trainer alongside. And that's where I picked up the bug for that. So helping people change was a lot different than helping people with like cuts, injuries, concussion, twisted ankles. And when I was working in Canary Wharf in Morgan Stanley in their gym underneath, I got exposed to a lot of like, I guess, C-suite individuals who just needed the gym for many other reasons. And then they come down and I just got the bitten by the bug there. After a few years, I became London's best personal trainer in a gym in central London. And then I decided to move online. One of my friends is Gujarati, or he's Gujarati, and he had a business very similar to how mine is now. And I knew nothing. I didn't know anything about the food, the cuisine, the different variations of dynamics there, the different castes, for example, how to navigate food around those. And I had to get really good because I don't like looking stupid. That's my biggest thing. I just don't want to look stupid. So I spent like 3 or 4 years working for those guys, traveling around, meeting my clients, Mumbai, London, US, Kenya, all were the hotbeds, I would say, of like I guess from an Indian perspective, there's lots of hotbeds, Chicago, London, all of these areas. And I just saw how people were eating, how they were interacting with family. And I obviously had a big client base of Indian people at that point, and I decided to do it by myself. And at that point, that's when autonomy was born. And then we started really looking at what was really missing within the community, whether it was from a food perspective, a knowledge perspective, and education, and just bringing that together as well. So that's like kind of the roundabout way how I got here. And the way that we, I guess, focus on belly fat is more a case of we know that from a genetics perspective that it's a sore spot for most people. They understand it, they recognize it, they see that it's a part of what they genetically have. It's the first person you gain weight, it's the last place that you lose it. So we know that a lot of people struggle with that. So we try and empathize, understand, put some direction in place so people can see our videos, see that, recognize and resonate that that's them, and then they get the good treatment on the inside when they work with coaching with us. So not specifically sub and belly fat, but obviously a large amount of our client base who are Indian all struggle with the same thing.
Why me? um
Yeah, yeah,
so,
no,
I mean, I've struggled with it my whole life. I mean, I'm so glad I podcast because you can so only see the top up. Right.
same here. I'm here like that.
That's why it's my favorite thing to do. um but I've struggled with it my whole life, and when we connected, like, that was my connecting point, was this was me, on your social media. I was like, this was me. So why us, and why is it such a struggle around that midsection?
So it's multifaceted in its approach. So the reason why, and I have it too, so I'm going to say we, and I consider myself as part of the community anyway. I'm an honorary Gora for many people. So um, we have it because of either genetic predispositions or just generally, like, lots of people conclude it's, some people blame the British, so I get a lot of comments about that. A lot of people blame the famine, and how then it interacts and stores fat in those areas, because it is very much like an area where it's unlimited fat can be stored. So it's a good storage area for most if you're looking at energy conservation. But I prefer to look at like what we can control as opposed to the stuff that we can't. Now, this is where then it gets more interesting, because there's things within like the social cultural dynamics that stop people from getting to that point where they lose their belly fat. So if we know it's the last place that comes off, you will end up like losing it off your clavicles, your arms, your wrists, and that will be the last place that comes off. And normally during the process of losing fat, that's when aunties comments and the direction of the social events kind of come, and people make their claims, and you need to stop dieting now, you look ill, you don't, have you got cancer, whatever it is that we've heard them all. And it normally discourages people from going that extra mile to get that last bit off. And because
Yes.
most people are psychologically wired to fit in or be part of a community, or don't want to stand out because you just want to go to these events and not have your auntie just barrage questions at you for no reason, ends up discouraging people to go that last yard. So it ends up meaning that people never really attain that physique, or that lower belly fat reduction, because it is the last thing that comes. So I always say you always have to be more stubborn than your stubborn belly fat. So you have to kind of resist it and go longer than most people to get it off. But I think that's generally why most people struggle, is because it's a lot of work and a lot of effort to then get maybe some negative comments and see some changes, but you don't see the gratification process. And that's obviously how we're wired. We love seeing change, we love seeing results, we love seeing I did this and I got this.
Yeah.
And if that is a longer term process, most people aren't wired to long term gratification. They want to see immediate results. And when that immediacy doesn't happen, that's when motivation wanes. That's when life gets in the way. That's when it becomes a 4-month journey, a 6-month journey, as maybe instead of a mentally prepared 6 weeks or a 4-week thing. And that's almost down to also diet culture as well. Everybody tells you can get in shape in 4 weeks or 3 weeks, or do a keto, this, that, and the other. So people aren't really mentally ready to weather the storm, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. That is all of us, I think. I think we've all been there, done that, and we've all had those auntie comments, right? Whether it's, you're very healthy looking or you're too skinny at some point, right? So
Yeah,
there's no in between, and there's just nobody's happy with you, and that's the whole body image, another
yeah.
episode. But why, what can we do, I think, is the main thing. Like, I know that we can kind of pass that middle hurdle where finally we are starting to now lose it off the midsection. But is there something else? Because a lot of us do struggle with passing, like, if we don't see any results even a little bit, where we're losing some inches or our pants are fitting better, we do give up. We've all done that. So is it, like, I know you can't blame one thing, but is it the food? Is it the lifestyle? And what can we do to really push that belly fat?
Okay, cool. So there are three major reasons why it becomes really hard. One is that the diets that most people go on are outside of their normal dynamics. So, for example, if you're like my clients in maybe Chicago, they might have had an upbringing where they went to university in Michigan or something like that, and they're not really connected with their roots. They probably have an easier time to change because they're not having the traditional food that often. Whereas if, let's say, and they're more open to then changing their foods and maybe changing to more Western diets and Mediterranean and this type of stuff. Whereas if you're so used to having like your Rajman chanas for lunches and dinners, and you're having your poo for breakfast, then someone gives you a diet that says, hey, now have 3 eggs or have this, and this. It can be a large change. And the most important part, if we understand that it's probably going to be longer than what you think it's going to be, then the dynamic changes. Instead of getting like short-term results, it looks at how long can I last on this. And that's how we view our diets, and the way that we deal with our clients is, I want, if you want to get that stubborn belly fat off, we need months. So how do I get you to do something for months? And that's how then more sustainable elements come in, of like, oh, is the diet set up so that you can have socials and go to weddings and go to these things, and understand how to navigate those so that you're not going 2 steps forwards, 2 steps backwards? Does the food include your food that your family are having at home? Like, if let's say, for example, is a wife is cooking for the whole family, or mum-in-laws, let's say, for example, you just moved in and you just got married to the family, and then you move into the other person's house. Let's say, for example, mum-in-law's cooking. That would be very difficult if you're trying to follow a very regimented diet, because she's cooking for everybody. So we try and make sure that the biggest thing is, can you do it for months on end? And then most people fail at that hurdle, because they match a diet to their results that they want to get. They want to get the short term stuff. They want to get the fast stuff. Whereas thinking, I need to be able to do it for 4 months. So what does that mean? So that's the biggest start. The second part is the love for food and the undying conditional navigation of food itself. Within the community, it means more than just performance. It means more than just energy in, energy out. It means good times, bad times. It means sad times. It means celebration. It means someone's coming over, we must put on this spread. It means so much that food is the core. And unfortunately, when food is the core and you're trying to remove food because you're not trying to eat as much as you need to, you either separate yourself from the pack, or you find it very difficult to withstand that for a long period of time, because that requires large amount of discipline, a large amount of like going without sometimes, and that kind of connection with food surpasses logic. So like, I love this, or like a lot of our clients, and I joke with them all the time, is like, I need a crunch, I need a sweet after a meal, I can't have, I need to have roti with my dinner, for example. These are all needs, but they're not actually needs, they're desires. But we've built up over time that this is what I need to have. So we often like look at that becomes very difficult over time, because people build up these associations with food, and then it becomes a barrier to remaining consistent, because then you're swayed by the auntie, you're swayed by the dinner, you're swayed by the social event, and that becomes a very much harder task to have, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
all
yeah.
of it is about creating something that is uh, storm proof, if that makes sense, or like
Yeah.
situation proof, as opposed to going down the long term. Like, I'm a big fan of like, if you're going to eat traditional food, and you're going to have traditional food in the next 10 years, you need to do it now, because we need to teach you how. And maybe it takes a little bit longer because mum-in-law's cooking, but you'd rather be able to learn how to do that than go away from it and then come back to it and then balloon back up. I'm sure.
It's really
I did.
interesting because it's kind of like, being a healthcare provider, we talk a lot about, in terms of diabetes, turning down the food noise, right? And that's very similar to what you were saying with the desires. It's like just turning down the thinking about food all the time. But that is what a lot of Asians were brought up with. Everything love, the way moms display love, the way everything's revolves around food. And I think that's a big barrier that we have to break, and that's probably the biggest issue. Do you think that, like, so how does protein play a role? Like, I'm not going to say we're all, like, all Asians are vegetarian, because there's a lot that aren't. But how does protein play a role? Like, is it that we don't think about protein as much as some cultures do, or how does that play a role in this?
I think we're in a bit of a state now in the, I guess, this century, or the 20 to about 2024. I've seen a rise in the popularity, or the understanding of protein to a certain degree from the community. But I think that it falls into three categories. People know that they need it, but don't tend to prioritize how much they need of it, and they misunderstand the dynamics. Two is that normally the dietary needs of somebody, like for example veggie, or veggie no eggs, or Jane, or Swaminarayan, for example, that creates then another barrier on top. And then the third barrier is the love for food, and more towards not wanting to repeat meals very often, or liking variety. And when you are vegetarian, for example, and you've only got to choose from, like, soy, tempeh, dals, paneer, you then run out of options very quickly, and then you don't want to repeat the thing because you're used to having lots of variety in your diet. Your mum would make you a different dal every night, right? So then you're accustomed to variety, and then when you have things very very similar on rotation, you almost feel bored. And now, because the love for food is very exciting and it's very happy, you doing something repetitive is the opposite. So then it's a turn off for most people. So that's why I believe that most people don't get the protein. It's not that they don't know that it's a benefit. They could probably list some of the benefits and they know roughly some of the things, but it's the psychosomatics of doing that daily that becomes a often barrier. So getting clients to understand how they can make tofu 5 different ways, or soy chunks 5 different ways, or how many dals that you can make on the side that are different variations, and how to cook, like make a really lovely chili paneer, like variations like this, where you use the same ingredients but you change the sourcing or the packaging or the variation, allows the South Asian community to stay work within their psychological wiring but stay consistent. So I think most of it comes down to there's an overcorrection as well. There's a lot of people, I guess, in America as well, is where they've gone all protein. They chase protein like it's their life depends on it. But then they also overcorrect calories. So they end up like eating as much protein as they can, but they disregard the major thing that is for fat loss or muscle building is the calorie intake. So they'll be like, I'm getting my protein in every day, but then by doing that, they've also then took away their chances of fat loss, which is obviously it's a better evil than most, but it's also a consideration there too. So I think that's where the challenge comes in, because I speak to 60-year-old people that we have on our team. They understand some level of wanting protein. They just don't like the repetitive or frequent nature or volume. Like if I said to you eat 180 grams of tofu, which is 200 calories and about 20 grams of protein, you'd be like, holy hell, I've never had that amount of tofu in a meal before in my life, and my digestive system is about to explode. But that's what you would need to do if you want to get 20 grams of protein. So when someone gives them a plan, they just see this number, they try it for 4 days, and they're like, I'm not eating that amount. And then they go back to what they were doing before because it doesn't fit within their remit of what they consider as right, if that makes sense.
Right, absolutely. You know what? It speaks to a lot of it. Like when I listen to you, I'm like, a lot of it is psychological, right?
Oh,
The
100% of it.
entire, it's like this bad relationship with food kind of that we need to retrain. And it's been ingrained in us since we're young. So I think it's also like a lot of our parents were immigrants, right? Most of us are here now. They were immigrants. So we've grown up with that thought process, and hopefully, with episodes like yourself, we and your fabulous Instagram, like we will be able to teach our children, these changes and not having those bad, I want to say food noise and bad psychological relationships with food. How does hormones, cortisol, hormones, stress kind of play a role? And I want to kind of add a twist in there as well, just talking about women as well. Do you feel women struggle with this more with their hormones?
Yeah, 100%. So so when it comes to, and I'm a big like nurture versus nature guy. So that's my kind of bias. If we're going to go down that route, just because I can control that with my clients as much as I can do. I can't control nature. As much as I'd like to, but I just can't. So let's take women for example. So obviously there's like major cycles in even in the hormonal perspective. So you've got stress, then you've got your menopause, and then you've got so you've got menstrual cycle, then you've got menopause. You've got like every 10 years you've got something. All of these areas really create a different mood set, a different psychology, a different feelings, different emotions, which then become relative to your food behaviors. So we know that if people are super stressed or they have a particularly low day, if their association with low energy is that they grab food to boost their energy, then when they are like low energy because of menopause, for example, they will use food as a pick me up to get there. And then that becomes then a leverage of extra calories, extra food. So there's all of these scenarios, especially during the menstrual cycle, for example. There's the notion that I want some chocolate, I want these things, da, da, da. And these are all kind of learnt behaviors. There's a really good study actually, and not many people like me saying this because it's just polar opposite. But they took women in an island in the bottom end of Fiji somewhere, and they were looking at like the different variations of like hormonal symptoms during the month of your menstrual cycle, and they compared it to Western women, and they looked at what signs and symptoms did they have and what were they desiring during that time period. Those people in the bottom end of nowhere, they were living on an island, barely communicating with the people that were there, but didn't have any desire for like chocolate or any of these things. They just they had the bleeding and they had the low energy. That's all they knew. And then on this flip side is that you look at Western people, and then they've got I need the chocolate, I need the takeaway, I need the biscuits, I need the crisps, and then what they did in the study was ask the parents what they also did as well, and it's a polar dichotomy. It's like whatever the parents did, what their social economic status did, what their environment did, they repeat as well. So anyway, from a hormonal perspective, you're always going to get that ebbs and flows across the 4 week cycle. But there are learnt behaviors along the way that I like to educate people on and understand that what is true and kind of what is can be worked on and navigated.
Right.
From a stress perspective, there's obviously a lot of things around how cortisol interacts and potentially navigates like belly storage. I don't really think I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum, which is like cortisol will rise and it will come down. And obviously, maybe sometimes you don't have that I guess, natural rise in the morning, and maybe like you're flatlined, fatigued, or you're just super high cortisol all of the time. Um, Most people who have those cortisol issues often use food and alcohol as a coping mechanism. So it's more like chicken and the egg situation. So if you got high cortisol, your food then goes a bit wary. Whereas, for example, I've other people where they control their food but have super high stress and they have no problem with their belly fat. And therefore it becomes not everybody is the same. So it's like if you have high cortisol, everyone should have high belly fat, but they don't. So therefore, there's a misalignment there somewhere, because we can take people's Dutch test data, which is where they weigh into a cup like 7 times across the day, and you can take that data and then you can look at how people react, interact, and what their weight loss looks like. And those that had high stress but stuck to their diet or stuck to their intake didn't really have an issue with the belly fat themselves. So I think often people want ideas and I guess want to attach why their problem is their problem, and often we look for new metrics or meters or data that we can pinpoint. But I think it always comes down to what you're doing when no one's looking, what you're doing to cope with those demands. Stress is really high. Like I had a binge eating order for 10 years. I know what it's like to wake up in the middle of the night at the cupboard with a biscuit already in my mouth. And I didn't. I knew my food related behaviors related back to my stress, but it wasn't my stress. It was the fact that I was eating biscuits at 4 a.m. in the morning was probably the biggest cursor. So that's my bias, and I know there's obviously various different variations that you can look at that. But I'm always like, how do we control this? How do we navigate this? Because might be able to stop the stress, but you probably have to give up your job and give up your
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
So if we park that over there and say, yes, let's minimize it as best as we can do. But the flip side, let's see what we can control from our side. How do we get better food relationship? How do we get better food behaviors? What coping strategies can we put in place that is not food? And how do we cope better? Is kind of my thought process on that.
That's so great. So, like, I want to ask you because you talked about the binge eating, and how we kind of forget sometimes what the bad food is we eat, and it's funny because my trainer always gets mad at me. You never log your food on the days you're eating something bad, and I'm like,
Story of
yeah,
my life.
that
Story of my life.
happens. So, you know, binge eating. Well, a lot of us do it at night, right? Because that's when we're kind of shut down. Kids are in bed. That's what we do. So, what is your suggestion? Like, does eating at night play a role? Like, should we not be eating 2 hours before bed? I've always heard that. And will that help with the belly fat? And also, then, does intermittent fasting then play a role? So, if you stop eating at 8 and you go to bed at 10, should you not eat till the next, have 12 hours? What are your thoughts on both?
So, firstly, we want to categorize what binge eating is. So, it's really important. So, binge eating is where you have an out of body experience where you are eating and you can't stop yourself. That's binge eating. Like, for example, I was waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning with chocolate already in my mouth. That's uncontrollable circumstances. Whereas, if you categorize it as I was on the sofa and I just fancied some chocolate and then I
Mhm.
gave in, that's not binge eating. That's just I guess what we call it just overeating. So both can play a role.
Okay.
With the eating past 8 p.m., um, there's no data to support that. If you, let's say, for example, you had your 2,000 calories from 6 a.m. till 8 p.m., or you had them all at 11 p.m. at night, the fat loss would still occur. You might just be heavier with the second one on the scale because you've had more food and you haven't had a poo yet, for example. So it's not necessarily about the times that you eat. It's more like the food that we tend to eat between the hours of 8 p.m. and 1 a.m. are always super high calorific. They're always crunchy. They're always very moreish. And it's not just a handful. And that's the barrier for most people. And therefore, what normally happens between those hours is just a little bit more uncontrolled eating. You've probably done really well for the other parts of the day. And then you say to yourself, oh, the kids are in bed. I just need, or I just want, or oh,
Mhm.
I could do with this. And they're all psychological tendencies of just like kind of letting ourselves use food to feel better. Um, so that tends to happen. Now, with intermittent fasting, it's very interesting because it's the same principle, which is if you eat over a certain amount of hours, you've got to be really like I see it more downside than upside, just because the amount of people I work, we were talking like worked out the other day, we're over like 10,000 people that over the last 12 years, 10,000 people. I haven't seen many people do effectively well. And the reason why is because most South Asians don't deal well with hunger. Hunger's bad in most cases. And now you're going to tell me that now you have to do food without for 12 hours. What ends up happening is at the end of that 12 hours, that food noise is even higher because we've already got a poor relationship. We make it worse. And then we then give ourselves the out by saying, oh, I didn't have breakfast this morning. Let me have a bit extra for lunch. So it's the psychology behind it. And then from a female perspective, I tend to see a lot more hormonal disruptions. For example, I've got a lady who's 26, and she's on and off dieted for like maybe 4 years, lost the menstrual cycle, comes back, menstrual cycle goes. And the only thing that we changed outside of changing some training program stuff was the fact that she wouldn't eat anything till 1 o'clock. And we know
Mm.
that from a female perspective, if you want to get you got to look at the data around how to solve things. So, how to solve binge eating will normally tell people how they can better react with food. How to solve amenorrhea, you also look at the data of how to solve that. You look at how we probably should eat for a female perspective, because normally it's the opposite. So, I don't want to do the thing that caused it. I'll probably do the opposite of it. That probably makes
Right.
sense. So for those people, having frequent windows of food is really more important as a female to not dysregulate hormones. You just got to think from 11 p.m. at night to 11 a.m., your body's thinking, I've had no calories. How am I going to produce energy to create this, this system that I've got, which is, a baby making system. And normally longer periods without calories end up that way. That's where you see a lot of people lose their menstrual cycle on low end diets when they're doing 800 calories. They do lots of cardio. They're creating a lot of calorie expenditure, and you're doing that by just not eating. So I don't recommend it personally. For guys, we're a little bit more, I guess, stable hormonally, and it's more just a if you want to. But a lot of business owners or entrepreneurs love the buzz of not eating because it fuels their productivity and they don't have to think about food, which is a benefit. But for the majority of people, let's say if you've got let's say a 5 out of 10 relationship with food, by doing that, you increase your poor relationship with food because the hunger and the going without normally leads to alternative behaviors afterwards. So I don't, and then, sorry, I'm rambling, but generally people who have intermittent fasting as part of their lifestyle, lots of people in Chicago and New York, my guys in America, they got onto the fad a couple of years ago. But
Yeah. Yeah.
what ended up happening is that they got into intermittent fasting because they didn't want to give up portion sizes in their evening meal. They liked, the psychological trait of like, I want to feel full, I want to feel happy, I want to feel, satiated. So they decided not to change that because they really wanted that, because that's an upbringing for the last 30 years. So they said, well, how do I still lose weight and do that? Well, basically, I don't eat for the rest of the day. So then they create this moment where it's famine and feast, and then they learn no control. They learn not how to say no. They don't understand their body's signals, and they end up just like getting used to then over consuming in one meal. And then for the next 10 to 5 to 10 years, when they go back to normal eating, which is like breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack, their expectations of food is so up here and a meal is here that they end up just feeling non-satiated even from a normal meal. Like 500-600
Right.
calories is what I would equate for a normal meal. But if they're accustomed to having, you know, let's say for example 1,500 calories in a meal, anything below that doesn't feel satiating, or that's what they've associated with that. So they end up feeling unfulfilled. They end up overeating and going back in these cycles. So in short, I'm not a big fan.
Yeah, like, I mean, it's funny because everything you said, like, there was this fad of intermittent fasting, right? I want to say it was like after COVID or during
Yep.
COVID, every after COVID, I guess, because everybody gained weight. I fell into that bandwagon, and you know what? Exactly what you said. It's funny because I don't think I ever correlated, but it was the food noise that went up the moment, and I wasn't losing weight. I mean, I only did it for losing weight. And it was actually throwing my sugar levels off, more off. And I was testing my sugars at that time. So, totally agree with you. Not for everybody. How does gut health play a role in, like, do you think that there is a correlation between poor gut health and storing fat there?
No, I think gut health is another thing, like a psychosomatic thing. Will that make you feel a certain way? I feel it creates more bloating and maybe things that look like storage,
Ah,
and
okay.
and maybe when you step on the scales, you get an alternative reading than what your efforts have kind of put in. But from like a perspective of anything, if anything, when you normally have gut issues, you normally absorb less of the thing because you can't absorb all the nutrients and stuff, so you normally end up getting less calories or less nutrition, for example. So it's normally down to the fact that diets you go on will bloat you or will create extra water retention, or if you just have a poor relationship with like protein intake, you have to build that up over time. If you've gone from one meal a week of tofu to then having 4 meals a day of cheese, tofu, yogurt, protein powder, eggs, whatever, the bacteria in your digestive system is not there. Like it's not there in the quantities that you need it. Like for example, I did a what we call an elimination diet. So I had like candida, I had all these other things that were going on because I was eating too much sugar, and then I had to go off it. So I basically did like a no sugar, no nothing. I just did this boring ass diet just to get rid of the candida. But when I put food back in, I saw my how I didn't digest the food very well because I hadn't had something for such a long time. The bacteria wasn't at that same level where it could digest that food. So I generally see that from a protein perspective, or the amount of fiber that people have, because that takes a while to build up as well. If you're not used to having large fiber, lots of veggies, cruciferous veggies, you do end up with a little bit more of a distension. But in terms of body fat, no, it doesn't. It just appears like that. If you've got bloating, you step on the scales, you've worked hard for a week, you're like, damn it, it's not gone. It must be my gut. I was in Kenya a week and a half ago with a bunch of people, business owners from Bangalore, and the biggest common question was literally, "My gut's messed up, my gut's messed up, my gut's messed up. Like I can't do this, I can't lose fat." And I'm like, I take them through this whole presentation of like what I think you should focus on instead of this, and all of them couldn't tick off the general boxes of like portion control. Understanding if your cook or your maid in Mumbai is doing the oils right, or how much quantity is there. So I guess it's one I like to say it's one of those things where people reach onto and say, oh, that's probably why. But there's obviously a list of all the basic stuff which you're probably underlying and missing as well.
Do you think South Asians, like, we were talking about bloating, do you think South Asians hydrate enough?
No one hydrates enough.
Yeah, no
So,
one
so,
hydrates.
so yeah, I think obviously you can get your money's worth out of chai, that's for sure,
Yeah.
um, and that's a staple. Um, but I think it's just a common thing of water is just not really thought about, pushed, or even the notion of having like most of it is family is related. So the research on like kids growing up is very like this will be a tangent, but it'll come back. Is like if your family has like a fruit bowl in your kitchen, you're more than likely the kids will be actually less obese over time. And if family members like parents don't see, you don't drink water, or your parents don't drink water, there's no importance, there's no mirroring, there's no matching of habits. And I was the same. Like my mum and dad would drink their weight in tea, their tea bellies, or what we call in the UK, and it's black tea, so it's not proper stuff, but it's just black tea. And they would have that 7, 8, 9, 10, 15 cups a day, and I've never seen my mum and dad drink a glass of water. So
Hmm.
then when I grew up, well, I didn't know what was that important because I'm seeing tea, and so I'm drinking tea. And then I got into coffee, and now I'm getting all my hydration from tea and coffee. But like I said, if you never see your mum and dad drink a bottle of water, or
Right.
yeah, I think that's really really key. And I think, like you said before, I think we're in the generation where we're obviously coming as a large amount coming from immigrant status to then transitioning, and this is the generation that can either adopt those philosophies of previous and extend them on to further generations, or we're in that moment where there could be a complete stop gap. And that's why I'm really passionate about this, because I think this generation now, 30 to 50, or like let's say 27 when people have kids, or 26 to 40, they have the ability to change everything, because the stories I share about like kind of families and
Right.
all that type of stuff, they can be rewired very quickly by them being the star of the family, them being the one person that looks after themselves, and we call it the spider web. So one person gets in shape, they criticize you at the beginning, they say, "What are you doing?" And then by the end of it, they're doing the same thing. They're
Yeah.
going out for
Yeah.
steps. They're cutting back on whatever they need. I think we're in a time where that's a real life, like life happenings, family by family, that we see.
Are there supplements that can give us a kick, like help us, especially those that are really in a bind? I mean, you must have clients that are struggling, trying their best. Are there supplements? I don't want to say every supplement will be for everybody. Of course, there we have that disclaimer there, but generically, what are the common supplements?
So if you want the one that's going to create an additional burning of calories, it's caffeine, but took in dosages of like 200 milligrams as opposed to a coffee, which is maybe 120. Caffeine and things like that, like green tea, increase your, I guess, energetic effect. So you will be more energized to then move. So it's not like it increases fat loss. It just means that you'll move more, which then gives you more fat loss because you're burning more calories. I think most people from the South Asian community need to operate on a spectrum of like, depending on where they sit on the diet front. So if you're veggie, you 100% need creatine, iron, all of the things that you can't really get from food in the same dosages. So creatine, which is if you go into the gym, you want to get stronger and fitter. It's basically, creatine is, just for simple terms, is like it helps muscles contract, and it's found in beef. Which you're obviously not going to eat special. We need to supplement with that so that you have adequate muscle contractions to improve your strength in the gym. And often with that lacking, you end up being weaker, and that will help with muscle tissue, bone density, and all that beautiful stuff that comes with age as well. I think. I'm a big fan of like getting as much salt from reducing body fat, getting good sleep, and hydrating. But then on top of that, I think zinc, um, some sort of like fiber supplement just to keep you fluid, and then caffeine if you want that extra like fat loss kick. Everything outside of that, I do like more on a case by case basis. So if you suck at
Right.
going to if you suck at going to sleep, actually going to sleep, not just sleeping duration, suck going to sleep. Things like melatonin, ashwagandha, variations that quieten the mind down, they can help you fall asleep better. And we know great sleep actually leads to better fat loss in terms of percentages. So if you have poor sleep, you end up burning less fat and burning more muscle. And we know if you get great sleep, which is 7 to 8 hours, a large percentage of that will be fat as opposed to muscle. So it's a really big priority there.
What are mistakes like? I mean, what are I don't want to narrow it to three, but you've seen people all over, everywhere, all different countries. I know you work with people. What are, the top few mistakes that people are making that are common, whether it's with foods or lifestyle?
But the biggest one that I deal with on a day-to-day basis is accuracy. So if you treat your food and your diet like a bank account, you'll be better off, or your profit and loss statement if you're an entrepreneur. Most people, the things that they don't think matter the most. So a teaspoon of this, a handful of that. If we don't know the levels of detail that like are specifics or objectivity, we can really lead astray by a couple of handfuls of this or a handful of that. I think the second biggest one is within the community is demonizing a specific food. So every family's got like we changed from this oil to this oil because that oil's bad, or we changed from uh, white rice to brown rice. And there's lots of demonization across the categories where I'm like, I'm Switzerland, I'm in the middle. Everything is good. You can have your chevro, you can have your wine, you can have your food, but you just need to learn how to do it. And often when you demonize a food, it ends up being like this good and bad relationship. So you end up on a good day, you remember that this sealed oil is not that good, or you remember that avocado is great on Monday to Friday. But then Saturday and Sunday, that's when the fried chicken comes out, and then you forget that happened, and then back on Monday, I'm on my health kick. So I think demonizing food puts you in that mindset again of food volume, which is good and bad. And often people struggle with good and bad because it means in and out, all or nothing. And when you have an all or nothing mindset, it ends up being quite dramatic from a you can't stay consistent forever. So I think looking at things a little bit more Switzerland, which is no food are bad. They just have benefits and negatives. And if you eat anything in a higher volume, you're always going to get some negative consequences. But thinking about that as a major proxy of being able to learn and teach yourself how to have everything often leads people to stick to diets longer, which is the whole point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I think the third one is that um, people will want to chase a body weight that they want to get to,
Yeah.
but the amount of body weight that they want doesn't equate to the physique that they also want. So they want to see something in the mirror, but they also want to be this number. So they haven't, let's say, for example, I got a lot of clients that say, I haven't been 75 kilos or 120 pounds since I was 16. And then when they see that number, they're like, I don't want to go anything lower than when I was 16. It's like, well, maybe at 16 you're a bit too big. Then maybe we haven't got the physique you want, so we need to chase the physique. So a lot of people get their aunties' comments. They'll see the scale. They'll see other people. They'll see how they feel in t-shirts, but they won't have the physique they want because they're looking to at a number that will define them. Whereas actually they want a physique that defines them. They want to look in the mirror and be proud and confident and wear a bikini and these things. And it often leads people to not really finishing their fat loss or end up getting there because they're too worried about a particular number or what that says about them or what that's going to get feedback from their family members. So we help people, like when we lose like 20, 30 pounds, we're like, hey, this number's going to go down, probably work further than what you think it's going to go down, but you're going to look amazing. Is that cool? And like, yeah, I want to look amazing. I'm like, okay, cool. When I say ditch the scale or throw it out the window, just do that for me. So then we just look at the physique because that just keeps you motivated as opposed to stepping on a scale, seeing like a number that you haven't seen since you were 14, and that might be a negative correlation for you, which is not great.
What is that sort of like? What is the most important, wellness or fat loss, weight loss, trend that you foresee is the one that will take precedence over the next few years?
I think unfortunately, it will be Manjano and Ozempic. I think it'll come to the forefront, and which it already is. But I think it will only progressively improve, if that makes sense. That there'll be better variations that
Yeah.
will not lead to further side effects. It's only going to get like better, So,
Yeah. Yeah.
I envision that at the moment in time with these drugs, you have the ability that you more than likely have to stay on it for life because of how much it plays around with your hormone, with your hunger levels, and then it's very hard to resist that hunger because it's at such a high number that you end up regaining your weight back. Whereas if they find a variation that limits that side effect, then you're going to be a couple of pins away from being in really good shape without the effort. Now that's back to and fro because most of this fitness journey is about skill set. It's about learning habits
Yeah.
and traits and routines and learning about yourself. Most of the people that I work with don't have a food issue; they have a life issue.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like you don't need food to cope if you have a great life or you don't hate your job or you don't hate the person you spend the most time with. And during a fitness journey, you learn a lot about these coping mechanisms, these desires, these skill sets that you haven't learned yet because you deal with failure because you don't lose the
Yeah.
weight. So
Yeah.
therefore, you see, and I always say to the clients, it's like everything's a skill set. What's the lesson that this thing is teaching you? Okay, you go to the social event and you drink too much wine. Okay, what's that teaching you? Well, it's teaching me that I can't really say no to my partner. Okay, well, what would happen if you said no to your partner? What's the worst case scenario? Have you communicated that you want to drink less? Do all of this? They've learned a skill through her not losing weight, for example, on the art of communication in a relationship. Like it's a skill set that they will all miss because they'll just be pinning the drugs. And then none of these habits or these kind of life skills will be represented through a fitness journey because a fitness journey is a transformation process from mind, body, and soul. And not just lose weight. When you lose weight, you also shed skills, habits, people, friends, because you become a different identity. But you won't learn that if you just pin the Ozempic.
Yeah. But I love that you said that because it's about you, right? And it takes a lot of guts and strength to be able to say no, whether it's in front of your friends, your spouse, whatever it is, to alcohol, to things that you feel are, affecting your weight loss journey. So, I'm going to close with that it is about you. And my take home message from this whole thing is just don't let those aunties' opinions get to you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
And
yeah.
do this for yourself. Nathan, thank you so much for your time today. Tell us where our listeners can find you.
You can find me on nathan.autonomy on Instagram, and that's where we do all of our, our videos, our coaching, everything like that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nathan.
My pleasure.
Thank you, listeners and viewers, for tuning in. If you want to catch more episodes of Uncover Your Eyes, make sure to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. To learn more about me, follow me on Instagram at dr.Meenal Agarwal. Until next time, keep those eyes uncovered.
See comfortably, near and far. With total multifocal contact lenses, feels like nothing.